Welcome back to another episode here. Okay, so this whole episode really is dedicated to tiger embossers, or I'm calling them tigers because somehow everybody calls them tigers. Truly, they are actually, the brand name is called ViewPlus. For some reason, everybody knows ViewPlus as tigers. You could walk up to somebody and be like, "Have you heard of the ViewPlus embossers?" And they'd be like, "No, who's that?" And then you say, "Have you heard of a tiger embosser?" And they'd be like, "Oh yeah, absolutely." So the ViewPlus is the true brand name, and somehow they got a reputation for everybody calling them tigers, and they're more recognizable as tigers. So I'm gonna call them tigers. I'm just gonna join the club apparently. So if you have a tiger, that means you have a special feature called multiple dot heights that it can do for tactile graphics. So it can have those models or brands that the ViewPlus company makes have those capabilities where they can control the punch force of their solenoids to create higher and lower braille dots, which can be a really useful feature if you know how to design with it and use it well. Namely, the first thing that comes to mind is when you're doing math graphs, having your grid lines be lower than your axes of your grid lines. So that's a super powerful feature. So we're going to do a dedicated episode basically just for relief dot height, as TactileView calls it, or multiple dot heights as the ViewPlus Tiger folks would call it. So if you have an embosser that supports this, so one of the Tiger models, so if I go to File, Print to Setup, you will see now, as we're in the rest of my episodes, I've been using the basic D. I now have a ViewPlus Columbia chosen there. Now I will have this relief dot height option. So this kind of just applies to really anything that any sort of graphic element that I might want to change the dot height on. So that could be like a square, it could be the circle, any of the object tools that we have covered. This could be parts of the graph if you were doing it. So I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of showing you the relief dot height on every single thing. I'm just going to show you where it is, how to find it, how to change it, and kind of how to make sense of it. So I will draw out a square. I have now drawn out a square. And you will find that on your kind of objects submenu here, and again, you'll have basically the same submenu for all the different lines, triangles, circles, polygons, graphs, all that kind of stuff, right? We've covered this again in a lot of detail in other episodes. You will have an additional item here, or a couple additional items depending on the thing that you're trying to change the line height for. So you'll have this little icon here, which looks like kind of a line with a little teeny tiny bump, a medium-sized bump, and a larger bump on there. And those are trying to represent multiple dot heights. And now, since I have a square, I actually have three of these. I have one for just the entire default line. I have one just for the outside of my square, shape around the outside edge. And then if I have chosen a pattern or texture fill, I could change the dot height on that separately than, say, the outline. So we can do kind of across the board, just for the outside, just for the inside fill. So we'll take a look at this. So if we click on this, you will see standard, which is going to be whatever basically it would have defaulted to, which would have been kind of a fairly high normal dot height without really changing it. And then you also have 0 through 8 dot heights. So kind of confusing, because you may have, in other Tiger programs or in working with the Tigers, again, if you're familiar with these embossers, you might be like, well, they only have 7 different dot heights. Well, they include 1 for text, and 0 is also kind of no dot height. So that's where you're kind of getting this extra one from. Anyhow, Tigers claim these 7 different dot height text, capabilities, saying that they are distinct from one another. And if you kind of put them side by side, there is a minute distinction. Tactily, I would say maybe 3 to 4 of these are really truly noticeably identifiable from one another. Like if you just said if you just put a 3 next to a 4, did a little square and separated them by a little bit, and had somebody feel 3, then had them feel level 4, and said, is there any difference? They'd probably be like, I don't think so, because they are so close. But if you had them bumped up next to each other, in a gradient kind of thing, they could probably tell there was a slight difference between the transition. So I don't, I'm not going to say I'm sold on all 7 being super, super useful, unless, I guess there are certain, I digress. There are certain situations that might be helpful, such as a gradient kind of thing. That could be kind of actually really neat. So I will recant my statement there. Anyway, but basically what you're going to do is 0 would be no dot height, or basically no braille dot, all the way up to 8 being the highest dot height, and you can kind of choose in between here. Again, since I think that for most of the time you are trying to make dot heights that are tactily noticeably distinct from one another, I would not probably recommend going and using all 7 within a particular graphic, expecting somebody to notice the difference between one element that's a 7 dot height and one element that's a 6 dot height, right? So generally speaking, I would do kind of steps between, like I might use an 8, a 6, and a 3 or something like that, and maybe a 1 for certain really low things. So I would kind of, hopefully that makes sense where I'm going with that. I would get a little space between your dot heights so that they are more tactily distinct from one another. So with that, you can just kind of choose whatever, again, TactileView is calling it a relief dot height, but basically it's just the height of the braille dot. Again, only for Tiger embossers. And so we can do that for, the outside edge, and you might have noticed my blue line when I chose that. It became basically a more faded, transparent, kind of almost purplish looking, but more transparent blue line, indicating by that it's going to be a lower dot height. If we went to our braille view, normally what we were accustomed to with our basic D is everything was just sharp and black dots. Now these are kind of a gray scale or a lighter gray to indicate, again, these are going to be lower dots. And if we drew out something else, like another square, you notice that one I have not changed the relief height on yet, and that one, the individual braille dots are darker, indicating that those are higher dots. So the lighter the color, the lower the dot, the darker the color, the higher the dot. And so again, these relief dot heights are basically on any of the submenus for any of the items that you might want to change. So if we went and drew a circle out, for example, voila, there is the relief dot height for our circle. Or again, we can do just the outside edge or just the inside pattern fill if we did a pattern fill. We can go down and we look at our table tool. Again, on the table tool, there we go. We have dot height for the whole thing, dot height just for the outer edges or for the inner stuff. If we drew out a graph, we'll go to the graphing tool. We'll just create a super quick graph here. Let's do x to the second. There we go. Voila, hit OK. Okay, I realize I'm just stacking stuff on top of each other, that this looks terrible on the screen. Just ignore that. Anyway, you can come in here and you could change the relief dot height for the whole thing, or you could go into your grid and graph properties here, and you could say change the relief dot height just for the grid lines to be a different one, and change your line thicknesses and stuff like that. So anyway, I don't want to spend too much more time on it than that, because you would have to have the specific embosser, and you would have to have a scenario that required it. But for those who have Tigers and do have those embossers and want to use the multiple dot height features, TactileView will call that relief dot height, and you will have options for changing all those different dot heights for the different parts of your drawing elements, provided you have a Tiger embosser selected. Again, so if I went into my print setup here, I got a Tiger, or ViewPlus, again is the actual name, brand name. If I switch it to the basic DV5, okay, that's what I was using before. I'll switch it back here. It's okay. And those items should draw something. Yeah, they did. They have disappeared, and so I no longer have the relief dot height options any longer, because I do not have an embosser selected that supports them. So again, that's just another kind of example of TactileView's, we'll call it intelligence, I guess, for lack of a better term, where it knows and understands the tactographic capabilities of the different embosser models you may be using with this. All right, we will wrap up this episode here, and we'll see you in the next one.